Question 1. Market research demonstrates a growing interest among residents of neighboring states in obtaining a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit. A potential applicant, who is a resident of Montana and legally possesses a concealed firearm permit in Montana, approaches a Wyoming licensed firearms instructor for guidance on the Wyoming permit process. The instructor is aware that Wyoming has specific requirements for non-resident applicants that may differ from Montana's. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Wyoming firearms instructor? Option A. Recommend that the applicant proceed with the Wyoming application process using their Montana permit as primary documentation, assuming Wyoming will recognize it as sufficient proof of qualification. Option B. Advise the applicant to thoroughly review the official Wyoming statutes and administrative rules pertaining to non-resident concealed firearm permits, and to ensure they meet all specific eligibility criteria and application procedures as outlined by Wyoming law, irrespective of their Montana permit status. Option C. Suggest the applicant contact the Montana Sheriff's Office for information on how Montana residents can obtain permits in other states, as they would be the most knowledgeable about interstate permit recognition. Option D. Inform the applicant that since they hold a valid concealed firearm permit in Montana, they likely meet the basic requirements for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit due to reciprocity agreements between states. The correct answer is B. Advise the applicant to thoroughly review the official Wyoming statutes and administrative rules pertaining to non-resident concealed firearm permits, and to ensure they meet all specific eligibility criteria and application procedures as outlined by Wyoming law, irrespective of their Montana permit status. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming licensed firearms instructor, because it requires navigating the intersection of state-specific concealed firearm permit regulations and the ethical obligations of an instructor to provide accurate and lawful guidance. The instructor must ensure that any advice given regarding permit eligibility for non-residents aligns precisely with Wyoming statutes, as misrepresenting these requirements could lead to legal repercussions for both the instructor and the applicant, and undermine the integrity of the permitting process. The best professional approach involves diligently consulting the most current Wyoming statutes and administrative rules governing non-resident concealed firearm permits. This means actively seeking out and reviewing the specific legal provisions that define eligibility criteria, application procedures, and any reciprocity agreements Wyoming has with other states. The instructor should then communicate this information clearly and accurately to the potential applicant, emphasizing that the applicant must meet all Wyoming requirements regardless of their home state's laws. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework established by Wyoming law, ensuring that all advice provided is compliant and promotes responsible firearm ownership within the state's regulatory boundaries. It prioritizes accuracy and legal adherence, which are paramount for any firearms instructor. An incorrect approach would be to rely on general knowledge of firearms laws or information from other states. This is professionally unacceptable because Wyoming has its own distinct set of laws for concealed firearm permits, and failing to adhere to these specific statutes constitutes a failure to provide lawful guidance. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that if an applicant holds a permit in their home state, they automatically qualify for a Wyoming permit. This is a dangerous assumption that ignores the possibility of differing eligibility standards and Wyoming's sovereign right to set its own requirements for carrying firearms within its borders. Such an assumption could lead to an unqualified individual obtaining a permit, creating a public safety risk, and violating Wyoming's regulatory intent. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying the specific jurisdiction's laws and regulations relevant to the situation. This involves proactive research into the most up-to-date statutes and administrative codes. When faced with ambiguity or a lack of certainty, the professional should err on the side of caution and seek clarification from official sources, such as the relevant state agency responsible for issuing permits, or consult with legal counsel specializing in firearms law. The core principle is to always prioritize legal compliance and accurate information dissemination over assumptions or generalized knowledge. Question 2. Market research demonstrates a growing trend of Wyoming residents seeking to travel to Montana for recreational purposes and a key concern for these individuals is understanding their ability to legally carry a concealed firearm while visiting. Given this, what is the most prudent course of action for a Wyoming resident holding a valid non-resident concealed firearm permit who plans to travel to Montana? Option A. Rely on advice from fellow travelers on online forums to determine Montana's concealed carry regulations. Option B. Carry concealed in Montana and only cease if questioned by law enforcement, hoping to avoid any issues. Option C. Proactively research Montana's specific laws regarding concealed carry and reciprocity with Wyoming permits before traveling. Option D. Assume that a valid Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit is recognized in Montana due to general interstate travel. The correct answer is C. Proactively research Montana's specific laws regarding concealed carry and reciprocity with Wyoming permits before traveling. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming resident seeking to carry a concealed firearm in another state. The core difficulty lies in navigating the complex and often varied reciprocity laws between states, specifically concerning concealed carry permits. A failure to accurately understand and comply with the laws of the destination state can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of their Wyoming permit. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with both Wyoming's issuance requirements and the receiving state's recognition of that permit. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively researching and understanding the specific concealed firearm permit laws of the state the individual intends to visit. This includes verifying if that state recognizes Wyoming's non-resident concealed firearm permits, and if so, under what conditions. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements of the destination jurisdiction, which is paramount for lawful concealed carry. Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104 outlines the requirements for obtaining a permit, but the legality of carrying in another state is governed by that state's laws and any reciprocity agreements. Prioritizing the destination state's laws ensures compliance and avoids potential legal entanglements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit automatically grants the right to carry concealed in all other states. This is a dangerous assumption, as reciprocity is not universal and varies significantly. This approach fails to acknowledge that each state has its own sovereign right to regulate firearms within its borders. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums without verifying the information with official sources. This can lead to misinformation and noncompliance, as these sources may not be up-to-date or accurate regarding specific state laws. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to carry concealed without confirming the legality in the destination state, hoping to avoid detection. This demonstrates a disregard for the law and carries significant legal risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the destination state. Second, consult the official government websites or legislative resources of those states to determine their specific laws regarding concealed carry and reciprocity with Wyoming. Third, if there is any ambiguity, contact the law enforcement agency or Attorney General's office in the destination state for clarification. This methodical process ensures that all legal requirements are met, protecting the individual from legal jeopardy and upholding the integrity of firearm regulations. Question 3. Market research demonstrates a growing interest in obtaining Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permits. A firearms instructor in Cheyenne, Wyoming, is developing advertising materials. Considering Wyoming's specific statutory requirements for concealed firearm permits, which of the following approaches to advertising their training course would be the most professionally responsible and legally compliant? Option A. Advertise general firearm safety training without specifically mentioning its relevance to the Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit application process. Option B. Advertise that completion of the training course guarantees the applicant will receive a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit. Option C. Advertise that the training provided meets the requirements for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit application, and that the instructor is qualified to teach the course as mandated by Wyoming law. Option D. Advertise that the training is equivalent to, or covers all aspects of a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit course, without explicitly stating it meets the specific requirements of Wyoming Statute 6-8-104. The correct answer is C. Advertise that the training provided meets the requirements for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit application, and that the instructor is qualified to teach the course as mandated by Wyoming law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearms instructor to navigate the complexities of Wyoming's concealed firearm permit laws for non-residents, specifically concerning reciprocity and the potential for misrepresenting qualifications. The instructor must ensure they are not only compliant with Wyoming statutes, but also ethical in their advertising and training practices, avoiding any actions that could mislead applicants or violate the spirit of the law. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to attract clients with the absolute necessity of adhering to legal requirements and maintaining professional integrity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and accurately stating that the training provided meets the requirements for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit application, and that the instructor is qualified to teach the course as mandated by Wyoming law. This approach directly addresses the applicant's stated goal and assures them that the training is relevant and legally compliant. It avoids making any guarantees about permit issuance, which is solely at the discretion of the issuing authority, and focuses on the training aspect, which is within the instructor's purview. This aligns with Wyoming Statute 6-8-104, which outlines the requirements for concealed firearm permits, including the necessity of completing a firearm safety course taught by a qualified instructor. By accurately representing the training's purpose and the instructor's qualifications, the instructor upholds ethical advertising standards and legal compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves advertising that the training guarantees the applicant will receive a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit. This is a misrepresentation because the issuance of a permit is a decision made by the state and is subject to various factors beyond the training itself, such as background checks. Promising a permit is misleading and potentially violates consumer protection laws and ethical advertising practices by overstating the instructor's influence. Another incorrect approach is to claim that the training is equivalent to, or covers all aspects of, a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit course, without explicitly stating it meets the specific requirements of Wyoming Statute 6-8-104. This vagueness can lead applicants to believe they are receiving the correct training when they may not be, potentially causing their application to be rejected. It fails to provide the clarity necessary for an applicant to make an informed decision, and could be seen as an attempt to circumvent direct compliance with Wyoming's specific training mandates. A further incorrect approach is to offer training that focuses solely on general firearm safety, without referencing or aligning with the specific curriculum or requirements outlined for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit. While general safety is important, it may not encompass all the legal knowledge or practical skills mandated by Wyoming law for permit applicants. This approach risks providing insufficient training, leading to an applicant's failure to meet the statutory requirements for their permit application. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves thoroughly understanding the specific statutes and regulations governing permits and training in the relevant jurisdiction, Wyoming in this case. Before advertising or offering services, professionals should consult the relevant laws, e.g., Wyoming Statute 6-8-104, to ensure their offerings directly address and fulfill all mandated requirements. Transparency and accuracy in all communications are paramount. Professionals should focus on what they can definitively provide: qualified training that meets specific legal criteria, rather than making promises about outcomes that are outside their control. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel is advisable. Question 4. Market research demonstrates a growing interest among Wyoming residents in obtaining concealed firearm permits in neighboring states for travel and recreational purposes. A Wyoming resident who holds a valid Wyoming concealed firearm permit wishes to apply for a non-resident concealed firearm permit in Montana. What is the most prudent and legally compliant approach for this individual to secure a Montana non-resident permit? Option A. Seek guidance from online firearm enthusiast forums and personal anecdotes from individuals who have obtained permits in Montana, as this often provides practical insights. Option B. Complete the Montana application by claiming Montana residency, as this may expedite the process and is a common practice among frequent visitors. Option C. Thoroughly research Montana's specific statutes and administrative rules concerning non-resident concealed firearm permits. Identify any unique eligibility criteria or application procedures for non-residents, and meticulously follow those exact requirements. Option D. Assume that the application process and requirements for a Montana non-resident permit are identical to those for a Wyoming permit, and submit the Wyoming application materials to Montana. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research Montana's specific statutes and administrative rules concerning non-resident concealed firearm permits. Identify any unique eligibility criteria or application procedures for non-residents, and meticulously follow those exact requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming resident applying for a non-resident concealed firearm permit in Montana. The core difficulty lies in navigating the differing legal requirements and application processes of two distinct jurisdictions, particularly when one jurisdiction, Montana, has specific residency-based provisions that could impact eligibility or the application procedure for non-residents. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to Montana's specific non-resident requirements could lead to application denial, potential legal repercussions, or even the invalidation of a permit if obtained improperly. Careful judgment is required to ensure full compliance with Montana's statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively and thoroughly researching Montana's specific statutes and administrative rules governing non-resident concealed firearm permits. This includes identifying any unique eligibility criteria, application forms, required documentation, such as proof of residency in Wyoming, and potentially a valid permit from Wyoming, fingerprinting requirements, and any reciprocity agreements or lack thereof between Wyoming and Montana. The applicant must then meticulously follow the exact procedures outlined by Montana's issuing authority for non-residents. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the jurisdictional specificity mandated by Montana law, ensuring that the applicant meets all statutory obligations for a non-resident permit, thereby avoiding potential legal pitfalls and ensuring the validity of the permit. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that the requirements for obtaining a concealed firearm permit in Wyoming are identical to those in Montana, and to submit the Wyoming application form and documentation without verifying Montana's specific non-resident provisions. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores the fundamental principle of jurisdictional compliance. Montana law governs permits issued by Montana, and Wyoming law governs permits issued by Wyoming. Failing to consult Montana's specific non-resident requirements is a direct violation of the principle that each jurisdiction's laws must be independently satisfied. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on general information found on internet forums or from informal conversations with other permit holders, without consulting official Montana government sources. This is professionally unacceptable because such sources are not authoritative and may contain outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete information. Legal requirements for firearm permits are strictly defined by statute and administrative rule, and reliance on unofficial sources can lead to significant errors in the application process, potentially resulting in denial or the issuance of an invalid permit. A further incorrect approach is to submit a complete application for a Montana resident permit, falsely claiming Montana residency. This is professionally unacceptable and carries severe legal consequences. Misrepresenting information on a permit application is a form of fraud and can lead to criminal charges, fines, and a permanent ban from obtaining firearm permits in Montana and potentially other states. It fundamentally undermines the integrity of the permitting process and demonstrates a disregard for the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the specific jurisdiction whose permit is being sought, Montana. Second, determine the applicant's status within that jurisdiction, non-resident. Third, locate and meticulously review the official statutes and administrative rules of that jurisdiction pertaining to the specific permit type and applicant status. Fourth, Gather all required documentation and complete the application precisely as instructed by the issuing authority. Fifth, submit the application and await a decision, being prepared to provide further information if requested. This systematic approach ensures adherence to legal mandates and promotes responsible conduct. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that a Wyoming resident, legally holding a valid Wyoming concealed firearm permit, is planning a vacation to Montana. The resident is aware of their rights within Wyoming, but is unsure about the legal implications of carrying their concealed firearm while visiting Montana. What is the most responsible and legally sound course of action for this Wyoming resident to ensure they are compliant with all applicable laws? Option A. Assume that a valid Wyoming concealed firearm permit is recognized in Montana, as most states have similar firearm regulations. Option B. Focus solely on understanding and adhering to Wyoming's concealed firearm laws, as their permit is issued by Wyoming. Option C. Proactively research Montana's specific concealed carry laws for non-residents, including any reciprocity agreements with Wyoming, by consulting official Montana government resources. Option D. Rely on advice from fellow travelers or online forums that discuss concealed carry experiences in Montana. The correct answer is C. Proactively research Montana's specific concealed carry laws for non-residents, including any reciprocity agreements with Wyoming, by consulting official Montana government resources. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming resident seeking to carry a concealed firearm in another state. The core difficulty lies in navigating the complex and often inconsistent reciprocity laws between states regarding concealed carry permits. A Wyoming resident must understand that their Wyoming permit, while valid within Wyoming, may not automatically grant them the right to carry concealed in another jurisdiction. Failure to accurately ascertain and comply with the destination state's laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including arrest and criminal charges, even if the individual is legally permitted to carry in their home state. This requires meticulous research and adherence to specific legal requirements, demanding a high degree of diligence and professional responsibility. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively researching and understanding the specific concealed carry laws of the state the individual intends to visit. This means consulting official government websites of the destination state, such as their Attorney General's office or state police. Determine if Wyoming's concealed firearm permit is recognized, reciprocal, and under what conditions. If reciprocity is not fully established, the individual must investigate whether they can obtain a temporary permit or if they must comply with specific restrictions for non-residents. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements of the destination jurisdiction, ensuring compliance with Wyoming statutes and the laws of the visited state. It prioritizes legal accuracy and safety, thereby mitigating the risk of legal entanglements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is assuming that a valid Wyoming concealed firearm permit automatically grants the right to carry concealed in any other state. This assumption is flawed because concealed carry laws are determined at the state level, and reciprocity agreements are not universal. Relying on this assumption violates the principle of due diligence and can lead to a direct violation of the destination state's laws, resulting in criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding another state's concealed carry laws. While well-intentioned, such advice may be outdated, inaccurate, or misinterpreted. Legal requirements for carrying firearms are precise, and informal sources do not carry legal authority. This approach fails to meet the professional standard of verifying information through official channels and can lead to unintentional noncompliance. A further incorrect approach is to only consider Wyoming's laws and assume they are sufficient for interstate travel. This overlooks the fundamental principle that when an individual enters another state, they are subject to that state's laws. Wyoming's regulations govern carrying a concealed firearm within Wyoming, but they do not dictate the legality of carrying a firearm in another sovereign jurisdiction. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of jurisdictional authority and interstate legal compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the destination state. Second, consult official government resources of that state to determine their specific laws regarding concealed carry for non-residents and reciprocity with Wyoming. Third, If the destination state's laws are unclear or do not offer full reciprocity, seek clarification from the relevant law enforcement agency or legal counsel in that state. Finally, always err on the side of caution and ensure full compliance before carrying a concealed firearm in a jurisdiction other than one's home state. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a Wyoming resident holding a valid Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit plans to travel to and carry a concealed firearm in Montana. What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action for this individual to ensure they are lawfully carrying a concealed firearm in Montana? Option A. Rely on information shared by other permit holders on online firearm enthusiast forums regarding Montana's acceptance of Wyoming permits. Option B. Assume that because they possess a valid Wyoming permit, it will be automatically recognized for concealed carry in Montana due to general reciprocity principles. Option C. Proactively research Montana's specific concealed carry laws and confirm whether Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permits are recognized and under what conditions, consulting official Montana government resources. Option D. Proceed with carrying their concealed firearm in Montana, believing that their Wyoming permit is sufficient without further investigation into Montana's specific regulations. The correct answer is C. Proactively research Montana's specific concealed carry laws and confirm whether Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permits are recognized and under what conditions, consulting official Montana government resources. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming resident seeking to carry a concealed firearm in another state. The core difficulty lies in navigating the complex and often varying reciprocity laws between states, particularly when an individual holds a Wyoming permit and intends to carry in a state with different regulations. Misunderstanding or misapplying these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of their Wyoming permit. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with both Wyoming's issuance requirements and the destination state's recognition of that permit. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively researching the specific concealed carry laws of the destination state and confirming whether Wyoming's permit is recognized there. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and safety by ensuring the individual understands the full scope of their rights and responsibilities in the new jurisdiction. Wyoming Statute 6-8-104 I and Roman II outlines the requirements for obtaining a permit within Wyoming, but it is the responsibility of the permit holder to understand how that permit is treated outside of Wyoming. This proactive research directly addresses the implementation challenge by preventing potential violations of the destination state's laws, which may have their own specific requirements for recognition or may not recognize Wyoming permits at all. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a Wyoming concealed firearm permit is automatically recognized in all other states due to reciprocity agreements. This assumption is dangerous because reciprocity is not universal and can be conditional. Many states have specific agreements or lack thereof, and failing to verify this can lead to carrying a firearm illegally in the destination state, violating their laws. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on general information found on online forums or anecdotal advice from other permit holders. While these sources might offer some insights, they are not authoritative and can be outdated or inaccurate. Legal requirements for concealed carry are subject to change, and relying on unofficial information can lead to significant legal missteps and potential criminal charges in the destination state. A further incorrect approach is to believe that simply possessing a valid Wyoming permit is sufficient, without considering any additional requirements the destination state might impose, such as needing to obtain a temporary permit or notify local law enforcement. This overlooks the fact that while Wyoming issues the permit, the destination state has the ultimate authority to regulate firearm possession within its borders and may have specific protocols for recognizing out-of-state permits. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the destination state. Second, consult official government sources for that state's firearm laws, specifically focusing on concealed carry permits and reciprocity with other states. This includes checking the website of that state's law enforcement agency or Department of Public Safety. Third, If there is any ambiguity, or if the destination state's laws are complex, seek advice from a qualified legal professional specializing in firearm law in that jurisdiction. This layered approach ensures thoroughness and minimizes the risk of legal noncompliance. Question 7. Benchmark analysis indicates that a Wyoming resident who holds a valid Wyoming concealed firearm permit is planning an extended stay in Montana and wishes to carry their firearm concealed. Considering the varying state-specific regulations and reciprocity agreements, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure legal concealed carry in Montana? Option A. Proactively research Montana's specific requirements for non-resident concealed firearm permits, including eligibility criteria and application processes, and verify the existence and terms of any reciprocity agreement between Wyoming and Montana. Option B. Focus solely on understanding and complying with Wyoming's laws regarding concealed carry, as this is the applicant's home state. Option C. Assume that the Wyoming concealed firearm permit is universally recognized for concealed carry in Montana due to general reciprocity principles. Option D. Apply for a Montana concealed firearm permit without first confirming Montana's policy on issuing permits to non-residents. The correct answer is A. Proactively research Montana's specific requirements for non-resident concealed firearm permits, including eligibility criteria and application processes, and verify the existence and terms of any reciprocity agreement between Wyoming and Montana. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming resident applying for a non-resident concealed firearm permit in a state with differing reciprocity laws. The core difficulty lies in navigating the complex and often inconsistent landscape of firearm regulations across different jurisdictions, requiring meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of both the applicant's home state laws and the laws of the state where the permit is sought. Misinterpreting or overlooking these differences can lead to serious legal consequences for the applicant, including permit denial, criminal charges, or even revocation of existing permits. Careful judgment is required to ensure full compliance and avoid unintended violations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively researching and understanding the specific concealed firearm permit requirements and reciprocity agreements of the target state, in this case, Montana. This includes identifying if Montana issues permits to non-residents, the eligibility criteria for such permits, and the process for application. It also necessitates confirming whether Wyoming's concealed firearm permit is recognized by Montana under reciprocity, or if a separate Montana permit is required. This approach prioritizes accurate information, gathering and adherence to the specific legal framework of the jurisdiction where the permit is being sought, thereby ensuring the applicant meets all necessary conditions before submitting an application. This aligns with the ethical obligation to provide accurate and compliant guidance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid Wyoming concealed firearm permit automatically grants the right to carry concealed in Montana due to general reciprocity. This is a flawed assumption because reciprocity agreements are specific and can vary significantly. Montana may have its own set of criteria for recognizing permits from other states, or it may not have a reciprocity agreement with Wyoming at all for concealed carry. Relying on a general assumption without verifying specific state laws is a direct violation of the principle of due diligence and can lead to the applicant unknowingly violating Montana's laws. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the application for a Montana permit without first confirming Montana's policy on issuing permits to non-residents. Some states only issue permits to their own residents. If Montana does not issue non-resident permits, the application would be futile and a waste of the applicant's time and resources, and could potentially lead to a denial that might impact future applications. This demonstrates a lack of foundational research into the target state's legal framework. A third incorrect approach is to only consult Wyoming's laws regarding concealed carry and assume that compliance with home state regulations is sufficient for carrying in another state. While understanding Wyoming's laws is important, it does not absolve the applicant of the responsibility to understand and comply with the laws of the state in which they intend to carry a concealed firearm. Each state has the sovereign right to regulate firearm possession within its borders, and failure to acknowledge this can result in legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a systematic approach to advising clients on interstate concealed firearm permit matters. This involves 1. Identifying the client's home state and the target state for concealed carry. 2. Thoroughly researching the target state's laws regarding concealed firearm permits for both residents and non-residents, including eligibility requirements and application procedures. 3. Investigating the existence and specifics of any reciprocity agreements between the home state and the target state. 4. Clearly communicating the findings to the client, outlining the necessary steps for legal concealed carry in the target state, and advising against any actions that could lead to legal violations. This structured process ensures all relevant legal requirements are met and minimizes the risk of non-compliance. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that when processing a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit application, what is the most prudent method to ensure compliance with state statutes and public safety? Option A. Expedite the application process by overlooking minor documentation issues to accommodate the applicant's perceived urgency. Option B. Rely solely on the applicant's self-reported information regarding their background and reasons for seeking the permit without independent verification. Option C. Accept the applicant's permit from their home state as sufficient proof of eligibility for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit. Option D. Diligently verify the applicant's stated purpose for seeking the permit against the specific requirements outlined in Wyoming Statutes Annotated Section 6-8-104, ensuring all eligibility criteria are met. The correct answer is D. Diligently verify the applicant's stated purpose for seeking the permit against the specific requirements outlined in Wyoming Statutes Annotated Section 6-8-104, ensuring all eligibility criteria are met. Explanation. Cost-benefit analysis shows that optimizing the process for obtaining a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit requires careful consideration of applicant intent and adherence to specific state statutes. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the applicant's desire for a permit with the strict legal requirements and public safety considerations mandated by Wyoming law. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to significant legal and ethical breaches. The best approach involves thoroughly verifying the applicant's stated purpose for seeking the permit against the specific provisions of Wyoming Statutes Annotated W.S.A. Section 6-8-104, which outlines the criteria for issuing such permits. This includes confirming the applicant's residency status in their home state and ensuring they meet all other eligibility requirements, such as age and lack of disqualifying criminal history. This method is correct because it directly aligns with the statutory mandate to ensure that permits are issued only to individuals who meet all legal qualifications and demonstrate a legitimate need, thereby upholding public safety and the integrity of the permitting process as intended by Wyoming legislators. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a valid permit from another state automatically satisfies Wyoming's requirements without independent verification. This fails to acknowledge that Wyoming has its own specific statutes and criteria that must be met, regardless of reciprocity agreements. Such an assumption could lead to issuing a permit to an individual who, while legally permitted elsewhere, does not meet Wyoming's distinct eligibility standards, potentially compromising public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize the applicant's convenience or perceived urgency over strict adherence to the law. For instance, expediting the process by overlooking minor discrepancies or accepting incomplete documentation without proper follow-up directly contravenes the statutory duty to conduct a thorough review. This bypasses the essential checks and balances designed to protect the public and could result in a permit being issued to an unqualified individual. Finally, an approach that relies solely on the applicant's self-attestation without any independent verification of their stated purpose or background will be fundamentally flawed. Wyoming law requires the issuing authority to make a determination based on established criteria, not simply on the applicant's word. This failure to perform due diligence is a direct violation of the statutory responsibility to ensure the safety and security of Wyoming residents. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant Wyoming statutes governing concealed firearm permits. This framework should emphasize a systematic review of all submitted documentation, independent verification of key information where necessary, and a clear understanding of the issuing authority's discretion and responsibilities. When in doubt, seeking clarification from legal counsel or supervisory personnel is paramount to ensure compliance and uphold ethical standards. Question 9. Strategic planning requires an applicant seeking a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit to meticulously assess their eligibility and the application process. Considering the legal landscape, which of the following actions represents the most prudent and legally compliant strategy for such an applicant? Option A. Thoroughly research and comply with both Wyoming's specific requirements for non-resident permits and the firearm laws of their home state, ensuring all documentation and training mandates are met for both jurisdictions. Option B. Proceed with the application based on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding reciprocity between Wyoming and their home state, without independently verifying official sources. Option C. Rely on general knowledge of concealed carry laws across the United States, believing that most states have similar basic requirements for permits. Option D. Focus exclusively on meeting Wyoming's stated requirements for non-residents, assuming that obtaining the Wyoming permit automatically validates their right to carry in their home state. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly research and comply with both Wyoming's specific requirements for non-resident permits and the firearm laws of their home state, ensuring all documentation and training mandates are met for both jurisdictions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit, while also adhering to the laws of their home state regarding firearm ownership and concealed carry. Misinterpreting or failing to comply with either jurisdiction's regulations can lead to permit denial, legal repercussions, and potential safety risks. The core challenge lies in understanding the interplay between state-specific permit requirements and the applicant's existing legal standing in their domicile. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching and understanding both Wyoming's specific requirements for non-resident concealed firearm permits and the firearm laws of the applicant's home state. This includes verifying eligibility criteria, application procedures, required documentation, such as proof of residency in the home state and any training requirements, and understanding reciprocity agreements. Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104 outlines the requirements for issuing a permit to a non-resident, emphasizing that the applicant must be a legal resident of another state and meet the same qualifications as a Wyoming resident. This approach ensures compliance with all applicable laws, minimizes the risk of application errors, and promotes responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that meeting Wyoming's requirements is sufficient without considering the laws of the applicant's home state. This fails to acknowledge that an individual must legally possess a firearm and be permitted to carry it in their state of residence. Ignoring home state laws could result in the applicant being in violation of their own state statutes, even if they obtain a Wyoming permit. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on general information about concealed carry laws without verifying the specific details for Wyoming and the applicant's home state. Laws are nuanced and can change. General knowledge is insufficient for navigating the precise legal framework required for a permit application. This can lead to submitting incomplete applications or failing to meet specific training or background check requirements mandated by Wyoming law. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application based on assumptions about reciprocity without confirming the current status of any agreements between Wyoming and the applicant's home state. Reciprocity is not guaranteed and can be revoked. Relying on outdated or assumed reciprocity can lead to a permit being issued that is not recognized in the applicant's home state, creating a dangerous legal situation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and diligent approach to permit applications. This involves identifying all relevant jurisdictions, Wyoming, and the applicant's home state, consulting official government sources for current laws and regulations, meticulously reviewing all eligibility criteria and application instructions, and seeking clarification from the issuing authority if any aspect is unclear. A proactive stance on understanding and complying with all legal obligations is paramount. Question 10. The performance metrics show that the average processing time for non-resident concealed firearm permit applications in Wyoming has increased to 45 days. The agency's internal service standard aims for an average processing time of 30 days. If the current bottleneck is identified as the fingerprint verification process, which currently accounts for 60% of the total processing time, and the goal is to reduce the overall average processing time by 33%, what is the maximum average time the fingerprint verification process can take to achieve this goal, assuming all other processing steps remain unchanged? Option A, 20 days. Option B, 5 days. Option C, 30 days. Option D, 15 days. Correct answer is D, 15 days. Explanation: the performance metrics show a significant increase in the processing time for non-resident concealed firearm permit applications in Wyoming. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the efficiency of a state service that has legal implications for individuals seeking to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Delays can lead to frustration, potential legal complications for applicants, and scrutiny of the agency's operational effectiveness. Careful judgment is required to identify the root cause of the delay and implement solutions that are both efficient and compliant with Wyoming statutes and administrative rules governing firearm permits. The correct approach involves a systematic analysis of the application workflow, identifying bottlenecks, and quantifying the time spent at each stage. This includes examining the average time taken for background checks, fingerprint verification, documentation review, and final approval. By calculating the percentage of total processing time attributable to each step, the agency can pinpoint areas for optimization. For example, if background checks consistently take longer than the established service standard, resources can be reallocated to expedite this process, or additional personnel can be trained. This data-driven approach aligns with the Wyoming statutes that mandate efficient and timely processing of permit applications, ensuring that the agency operates within reasonable timeframes as implied by the need for a permit for lawful concealed carry. The goal is to reduce the average processing time from the current 45 days to a target of 30 days, representing a 33% reduction. An incorrect approach would be to implement broad, unanalyzed changes, such as simply hiring more staff without understanding where the current inefficiencies lie. This could lead to increased costs without a proportional improvement in processing times, failing to address the specific bottlenecks. Another incorrect approach would be to relax or bypass established verification procedures to speed up the process. This would be a direct violation of Wyoming law and administrative rules designed to ensure public safety and the integrity of the permitting system. Such actions could have severe legal and ethical repercussions, undermining the credibility of the agency and potentially compromising public safety. Professionals should employ a data-driven decision-making framework. This involves 1. Defining clear performance objectives, e.g., reducing average processing time by 33%. 2. Collecting and analyzing relevant data to identify specific problem areas. 3. Developing targeted solutions based on the data. 4. Implementing and monitoring the solutions. And 5. Continuously evaluating and refining the process. This systematic approach ensures that resources are used effectively and that all actions are compliant with legal and ethical standards. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates that applicants for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit sometimes face challenges due to misunderstandings about eligibility and documentation. Considering Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104, which of the following approaches best ensures a successful application for a non-resident seeking a Wyoming concealed firearm permit? Option A. Submit an application with firearm proficiency training that is accepted in the applicant's home state, even if it differs from the specific types of training listed in Wyoming law. Option B. Assume that a valid concealed firearm permit from another state with a reciprocity agreement with Wyoming automatically satisfies all application requirements. Option C. Rely on general advice found on firearm enthusiast forums and websites to determine the necessary documentation and eligibility criteria. Option D. Thoroughly review Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104 and ensure all submitted documentation, including firearm proficiency training, precisely meets the specific requirements outlined in that statute. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly review Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104 and ensure all submitted documentation, including firearm proficiency training, precisely meets the specific requirements outlined in that statute. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit to navigate potentially conflicting information regarding reciprocity and the specific requirements of Wyoming law. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to Wyoming statutory requirements for permit issuance, even if another state's laws seem more permissive, can lead to denial and potential legal complications. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of Wyoming's specific eligibility criteria, not just general assumptions about concealed carry rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously reviewing and adhering to the Wyoming statutes governing the issuance of non-resident concealed firearm permits. This means ensuring all application materials, including proof of firearm proficiency training that meets Wyoming's specific standards, are submitted accurately and completely. The applicant must confirm they meet all eligibility requirements outlined in Wyoming law, such as age, residency status for non-residents. This means meeting the criteria for applying from out of state, and the absence of disqualifying criminal history or mental health adjudications. This approach is correct because Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104 explicitly details the requirements for issuing a permit, and failure to meet any of these statutory mandates will result in denial. Adhering strictly to these state-specific laws is the only way to ensure a successful application. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because another state has a reciprocity agreement with Wyoming, the applicant's permit from that state automatically qualifies them for a Wyoming permit. While reciprocity allows for recognition of permits, it does not waive the fundamental eligibility requirements for obtaining a Wyoming permit in the first place. This approach fails because Wyoming law dictates the criteria for issuing its own permits, and simply holding a permit from another state does not inherently prove an applicant meets those specific Wyoming criteria. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on general online information or advice from individuals not directly affiliated with the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, especially if that information contradicts or omits specific statutory requirements. This is a failure because the official statutes are the definitive source of law, and unofficial sources can be outdated, inaccurate, or incomplete. Relying on such information can lead to submitting an incomplete or non-compliant application. A third incorrect approach is to submit an application with training documentation that is not explicitly recognized by Wyoming law for concealed firearm permits, even if it is accepted in the applicant's home state. Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104C, Roman 2, specifies the types of firearm proficiency training that are acceptable. If the training does not meet these precise standards, the application will be denied, regardless of its validity elsewhere. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by prioritizing the specific statutory requirements of the jurisdiction where the permit is being sought. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant statutes, in this case, Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104. 2. Thoroughly reviewing all eligibility criteria and documentation requirements. 3. Verifying that all submitted materials, including training certifications, precisely meet the statutory mandates. 4. Consulting official sources, such as the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigations website, or directly contacting them for clarification on any ambiguities. This systematic, law-centric approach ensures compliance and minimizes the risk of application denial due to procedural or substantive errors. Question 12. Regulatory review indicates that an individual residing in Montana who holds a valid concealed firearm permit issued by the state of Montana wishes to obtain a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit. What is the most appropriate course of action for this individual to ensure compliance with Wyoming's firearm regulations? Option A. Thoroughly research Wyoming statutes and administrative rules regarding non-resident concealed firearm permits, focusing on eligibility criteria, required training, and the application process, and then submit a complete application accordingly. Option B. Submit an application for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit using the same documentation and training certificates that were accepted for their Montana permit, without verifying if they meet Wyoming's specific requirements. Option C. Assume that Montana's concealed firearm permit is recognized in Wyoming due to reciprocity, and proceed to carry a concealed firearm without applying for a Wyoming permit. Option D. Rely on advice from online firearm enthusiast groups to determine the necessary steps for obtaining a Wyoming permit, as they often share practical insights. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly research Wyoming statutes and administrative rules regarding non-resident concealed firearm permits, focusing on eligibility criteria, required training, and the application process, and then submit a complete application accordingly. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit to navigate the nuances of interstate recognition of firearm laws and the specific requirements of Wyoming's permitting process. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these requirements can lead to denial of the permit, potential legal complications, and a misunderstanding of their rights and responsibilities when carrying a concealed firearm in Wyoming. The applicant must demonstrate a thorough understanding of both their home state's laws and Wyoming's specific criteria for non-residents. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves meticulously reviewing Wyoming statutes and administrative rules pertaining to concealed firearm permits for non-residents, specifically focusing on the reciprocity agreements and the application process. This includes understanding the eligibility criteria, the required documentation, such as proof of firearm proficiency training that meets Wyoming standards, and the submission procedures. Adhering strictly to these established legal frameworks ensures the application is complete and compliant, maximizing the likelihood of approval and demonstrating responsible firearm ownership. This approach directly aligns with Wyoming Statute 6-8-104, which outlines the requirements for issuing concealed firearm permits, including provisions for non-residents and the recognition of training. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a concealed firearm permit issued by the applicant's home state automatically grants them the right to carry a concealed firearm in Wyoming without further application or verification. This fails to acknowledge that Wyoming has its own specific permitting process for non-residents, and that reciprocity is not always automatic or comprehensive. This approach violates the principle of adhering to the specific jurisdiction's laws, as outlined in Wyoming Statute 6-8-104, which mandates a formal application process for non-residents. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from online forums or individuals without verifying the information against official Wyoming statutes and administrative rules. This can lead to misinformation regarding eligibility, required training, or application procedures. Such an approach disregards the legal authority and accuracy of official government sources, potentially resulting in a flawed application and denial. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application with incomplete or inaccurate documentation, such as failing to provide proof of a recognized firearm proficiency course or misrepresenting residency information. This directly contravenes the explicit requirements set forth in Wyoming's concealed firearm permit application process, leading to rejection and potentially flagging the applicant for further scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and legally grounded approach. This involves identifying the relevant jurisdiction, Wyoming, understanding the specific permit type, non-resident concealed firearm permit, and consulting the authoritative legal sources, Wyoming statutes and administrative rules. The process should involve a checklist of all required elements, verification of any reciprocity agreements, and careful completion of all application forms and supporting documents. If any aspect is unclear, seeking clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel specializing in firearm law is advisable. Question 13. Performance analysis shows that a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit holder is planning a road trip that will take them through several other states before reaching their final destination. Considering the varying legal landscapes of firearm possession and concealed carry across different jurisdictions, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure compliance with all applicable laws? Option A. Only research the laws of the final destination state, as the transit states are less critical for compliance. Option B. Proactively research the specific concealed carry laws and reciprocity agreements of each state the permit holder will be traveling through, and obtain any necessary additional permits or licenses if reciprocity is not established. Option C. Assume that the Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit is recognized in all states, as firearm reciprocity is generally understood to be widespread. Option D. Rely on informal advice from fellow permit holders regarding which states recognize Wyoming permits and proceed based on that information. Correct answer is B. Proactively research the specific concealed carry laws and reciprocity agreements of each state the permit holder will be traveling through, and obtain any necessary additional permits or licenses if reciprocity is not established. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a permit holder to navigate the complexities of interstate firearm laws, specifically concerning concealed carry rights when traveling outside of Wyoming. The core challenge lies in understanding and adhering to the reciprocity agreements, or lack thereof, between Wyoming and other states, and the potential legal ramifications of carrying a concealed firearm without proper authorization in a jurisdiction that does not recognize the Wyoming permit. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintentional violations of law, which can lead to severe penalties. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively researching and understanding the concealed carry laws of any state one intends to travel to with a firearm. This includes verifying if Wyoming's non-resident concealed firearm permit is recognized, reciprocity, in the destination state, or if additional permits or licenses are required. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership by ensuring the permit holder is authorized to carry concealed firearm in the destination jurisdiction, thereby avoiding potential legal entanglements and upholding the spirit of firearm reciprocity laws. It directly addresses the requirement to know and follow the laws of the jurisdiction where the firearm is being carried. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit is universally recognized in all other states. This assumption is a significant regulatory failure, as reciprocity is not automatic and varies greatly by state. Relying on this assumption could lead to carrying a concealed firearm in a state where it is illegal, resulting in arrest and prosecution under that state's laws. Another incorrect approach is to only research the laws of the destination state after arriving, or worse, not at all. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal obligations of carrying a firearm in a different jurisdiction. It creates a high risk of unintentional violation. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on anecdotal information from other permit holders regarding reciprocity. While informal advice can be a starting point, it is not a substitute for official legal information and can be outdated or inaccurate, leading to serious legal consequences. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and diligent approach to understanding legal requirements. This involves consulting official sources, such as state government websites or law enforcement agencies, for the most current and accurate information regarding firearm reciprocity. A decision-making framework should include 1. Identifying the destination jurisdiction. 2. Researching that jurisdiction's specific laws regarding concealed carry for non-residents. 3. Verifying reciprocity with Wyoming's permit. 4. Obtaining any necessary additional permits or licenses if reciprocity is not established. 5. Always erring on the side of caution and seeking clarification from official sources if there is any doubt. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal that a Wyoming resident is seeking to obtain a non-resident concealed firearm permit in Montana. Which of the following actions best ensures compliance with Montana's legal framework for such applications? Option A. Relying on advice from online forums or acquaintances who have experience with concealed carry permits in general, without verifying Montana's specific non-resident requirements. Option B. Submitting an application using the forms and procedures required for a Wyoming concealed firearm permit, assuming Montana will recognize them due to reciprocity. Option C. Directly consulting Montana's official government resources, such as the Montana Department of Justice or the relevant sheriff's office, to obtain the most accurate and up-to-date application forms and instructions specific to non-residents. Option D. Completing the application based on general knowledge of concealed carry laws, without specifically researching Montana's statutes for non-resident permit applicants. Correct answer is C. Directly consulting Montana's official government resources, such as the Montana Department of Justice or the relevant sheriff's office, to obtain the most accurate and up-to-date application forms and instructions specific to non-residents. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Wyoming resident applying for a non-resident concealed firearm permit in Montana. The core difficulty lies in navigating the differing legal requirements and application processes of two distinct jurisdictions, particularly when one jurisdiction, Montana, has specific reciprocity agreements or lack thereof with the applicant's home state, Wyoming. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to Montana's specific application procedures for non-residents could lead to denial, potential legal repercussions, and a waste of the applicant's time and resources. Careful judgment is required to ensure all Montana statutory requirements are met, even if they differ from Wyoming's. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching and adhering to Montana's specific statutory requirements for non-resident concealed firearm permits, as outlined in the Montana Code annotated. This includes understanding any specific documentation, background checks, or training prerequisites mandated by Montana law for individuals who are not residents of Montana. The correct approach is to directly consult Montana's official government resources, such as the Montana Department of Justice or the relevant sheriff's office, to obtain the most accurate and up-to-date application forms and instructions. This ensures compliance with Montana's legislative framework, which governs the issuance of permits within its borders, irrespective of the applicant's home state's laws. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that Wyoming's concealed firearm permit laws and application process are directly transferable or equivalent to Montana's. This is a regulatory failure because Montana has its own distinct set of laws and administrative procedures for issuing permits to non-residents. Relying solely on Wyoming's requirements would likely result in an incomplete or non-compliant Montana application, leading to denial. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice from individuals who may not be knowledgeable about Montana's specific non-resident permit regulations. This is an ethical and regulatory failure as it bypasses official channels and could lead to misinformation, resulting in a flawed application and potential legal issues. Official government sources are the only reliable authority for such matters. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application based on general assumptions about concealed, carry laws without verifying Montana's specific statutes for non-residents. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to comply with the principle that individuals are responsible for understanding and adhering to the laws of the jurisdiction in which they seek to exercise a right. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach when assisting clients with interjurisdictional permit applications. This involves 1. Identifying the specific jurisdiction whose permit is being sought, Montana. 2. Ascertaining the applicant's residency status, Wyoming resident. 3. Prioritizing the laws and regulations of the issuing jurisdiction, Montana, for non-residents. 4. Consulting official government websites and statutes of the issuing jurisdiction for accurate requirements. 5. Completing all application materials precisely as prescribed by the issuing jurisdiction. 6. Understanding that reciprocity agreements may affect recognition of permits, but do not alter the application requirements for obtaining a permit in the first place. Question 15. The monitoring system demonstrates that a Wyoming resident who currently holds a valid concealed firearm permit issued by the state of Montana is seeking to understand their legal right to carry a concealed firearm within Wyoming. What is the most appropriate and legally sound method for this individual to determine their eligibility and the conditions under which they can carry a concealed firearm in Wyoming? Option A. Assume that because Montana has relatively permissive gun laws, their concealed firearm permit will be automatically recognized for carry in Wyoming. Option B. Contact the local sheriff's department in Wyoming to inquire about their personal interpretation of gun laws for non-residents. Option C. Rely on information shared on a popular online firearms enthusiast forum, as it often contains practical advice from individuals with experience carrying firearms across state lines. Option D. Thoroughly review the Wyoming statutes, specifically those pertaining to concealed firearm permits and reciprocity with other states, to ascertain if Montana permits are recognized and under what conditions. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly review the Wyoming statutes, specifically those pertaining to concealed firearm permits and reciprocity with other states, to ascertain if Montana permits are recognized and under what conditions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a Wyoming resident who has obtained a concealed firearm permit in another state and is now seeking to understand the implications of Wyoming's reciprocity laws for carrying a firearm within Wyoming. The challenge lies in navigating the nuances of interstate recognition of firearm permits and ensuring compliance with Wyoming's specific statutes, which can differ significantly from those of other states. Misunderstanding these laws can lead to serious legal consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves directly consulting the official Wyoming statutes and administrative rules pertaining to concealed firearm permits and reciprocity. This approach is correct because it relies on the definitive legal authority governing firearm possession in Wyoming. Specifically, understanding Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104, which addresses the reciprocity of permits issued by other states, is paramount. This statute outlines the conditions under which a permit issued by another state is recognized in Wyoming, and it is the sole source for determining legal carry rights for non-residents. Adhering to this direct statutory interpretation ensures full compliance with Wyoming law and avoids reliance on potentially outdated or misinterpreted information. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying on information from an online forum or a general firearms advocacy website presents a significant regulatory failure. These sources, while potentially informative, are not official legal pronouncements and may contain inaccuracies, outdated information, or interpretations that do not align with Wyoming's specific legal framework. This could lead to a violation of Wyoming Statute Section 6-8-104, which requires that a non-resident permit be issued by a state that has a reciprocity agreement with Wyoming or that meets specific criteria outlined in the statute. Similarly, assuming that permit from a state with similar gun laws automatically grants carry rights in Wyoming is an ethical and regulatory failure. Wyoming law does not operate on a principle of general similarity, but on specific statutory recognition of permits. This assumption bypasses the legal requirement for Wyoming to recognize the permit, potentially leading to carrying a firearm unlawfully in Wyoming. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should always prioritize consulting primary legal sources. This involves identifying the relevant statutes and administrative regulations of the jurisdiction in question. If direct access to statutes is difficult, seeking guidance from a legal professional specializing in firearm law in that jurisdiction is the next best step. The decision-making process should always begin with a presumption of ignorance regarding specific jurisdictional laws and a commitment to thorough research and verification before acting on assumptions. Question 16. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a Wyoming resident who frequently travels to Montana for business needs to obtain a non-resident concealed firearm permit. Considering the legal and procedural requirements, which of the following actions best optimizes the application process and ensures compliance with Wyoming law? Option A. Relying on general advice from online forums and discussions about concealed carry laws across various states, without verifying the information against official Wyoming statutes or administrative rules. Option B. Submitting an application for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit with information that is partially incomplete, believing that the authorities will request missing details if necessary. Option C. Assuming that the concealed carry permit issued by their home state of Wyoming is sufficient for carrying a concealed firearm in Montana, without investigating Montana's specific reciprocity laws or Wyoming's non-resident permit requirements. Option D. Thoroughly researching and adhering to the specific requirements for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit as outlined in the Wyoming statutes and by the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, including any specific training or documentation mandates. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly researching and adhering to the specific requirements for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit as outlined in the Wyoming statutes and by the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, including any specific training or documentation mandates. Explanation. Cost-benefit analysis shows that optimizing the process for obtaining a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit involves understanding the nuances of state law and applicant responsibility. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate specific Wyoming statutes and administrative rules without misinterpreting requirements or engaging in actions that could lead to denial or legal repercussions. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of the legal framework governing concealed carry for non-residents. The best approach involves meticulously reviewing the Wyoming statutes, specifically those pertaining to concealed firearm permits for non-residents, and adhering strictly to the application procedures outlined by the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. This includes understanding residency requirements, eligibility criteria, training mandates, and the specific documentation needed. The applicant must proactively seek clarification from official sources if any aspect of the process is unclear, ensuring full compliance with Wyoming law. This is correct because it prioritizes legal accuracy and procedural integrity, minimizing the risk of application errors or violations of Wyoming's firearm laws. An approach that relies on generalized information about concealed carry permits in other states is incorrect. This fails to acknowledge that Wyoming has its own distinct legal framework, and assuming similarities can lead to overlooking specific Wyoming requirements, such as particular training certifications or background check protocols, potentially resulting in an incomplete or invalid application. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because a permit was issued in another state, it automatically satisfies Wyoming's requirements without verification. Wyoming law dictates its own standards for permit issuance, and reciprocity agreements do not negate the need for an applicant to meet Wyoming's specific criteria for a non-resident permit. This can lead to the applicant believing they are compliant when they are not, potentially resulting in carrying a firearm without a valid Wyoming permit. Finally, an approach that involves submitting an application with incomplete or inaccurate information, hoping it will be overlooked, is fundamentally flawed. Wyoming law requires truthful and complete disclosure on permit applications. Any misrepresentation or omission can lead to immediate denial and potential legal consequences, demonstrating a disregard for the legal and ethical obligations of permit applicants. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with identifying the specific jurisdiction and its governing laws. They should then consult official government sources for the most accurate and up-to-date information. Any ambiguity should be resolved through direct communication with the relevant regulatory body. Finally, all actions taken should be documented and demonstrably in compliance with the established legal framework. Question 17. Cost-benefit analysis shows that applicants seeking a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit must navigate specific state requirements. Which of the following strategies best optimizes the application process by ensuring compliance with Wyoming law and maximizing the likelihood of approval? Option A. Assuming the requirements for a Wyoming non-resident permit are the same as those in the applicant's home state or other states where they hold permits, and submitting similar documentation. Option B. Submitting an application with incomplete or potentially inaccurate information, hoping that the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation will overlook minor discrepancies during processing. Option C. Relying on advice from online forums and personal acquaintances to gather information about the application process, without independently verifying it against official sources. Option D. Diligently consulting the official Wyoming statutes, particularly Title VI, Chapter 8, and the administrative rules of the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, to understand and meet all specific eligibility criteria, documentation requirements, and submission procedures for non-residents. The correct answer is D. Diligently consulting the official Wyoming statutes, particularly Title VI, Chapter 8, and the administrative rules of the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, to understand and meet all specific eligibility criteria, documentation requirements, and submission procedures for non-residents. Explanation. Cost-benefit analysis shows that understanding the nuances of Wyoming's non-resident concealed firearm permit process is crucial for efficient and compliant application. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating specific state statutes and administrative rules that differ from other jurisdictions, demanding meticulous attention to detail to avoid application rejection or potential legal issues. A superficial understanding can lead to significant delays or outright denial, impacting the applicant's ability to exercise their rights legally. The best approach involves thoroughly reviewing the Wyoming statutes, specifically Title VI, Chapter 8, Firearms, and the administrative rules promulgated by the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, concerning concealed firearm permits for non-residents. This includes understanding the eligibility criteria, the required documentation, such as proof of residency in the applicant's home state, firearm safety training certification, and background check authorizations, and the specific application submission procedures. Adhering strictly to these requirements ensures the application is complete and meets all legal prerequisites, thereby maximizing the chances of approval and minimizing processing time. This is the correct approach because it directly addresses the legal framework governing non-resident permits in Wyoming, demonstrating a commitment to compliance and accuracy. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the requirements for a non-resident permit in Wyoming are identical to those in the applicant's home state or any other state where they may have previously obtained a permit. This failure to recognize jurisdictional specificity can lead to submitting incomplete or incorrect documentation, such as inadequate proof of firearm safety training or misinterpreting residency requirements. Such oversights directly violate the regulatory framework by not meeting the explicit mandates of Wyoming law, potentially resulting in application denial and the need to restart the process. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from online forums or individuals without verifying the information against official Wyoming statutes and DCI guidelines. While anecdotal evidence can sometimes offer insights, it is not a substitute for legal and regulatory accuracy. Misinformation or outdated advice can lead to critical errors in the application, such as failing to obtain the correct type of training or overlooking specific disqualifying factors outlined in Wyoming law. This approach risks noncompliance due to a lack of due diligence in consulting authoritative sources. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application with missing or falsified information, hoping it will be overlooked. This is not only a violation of the application process, but also carries significant ethical and legal implications. Wyoming law, like most jurisdictions, requires truthful and complete disclosure. Attempting to circumvent the process through deception undermines the integrity of the permitting system and can lead to severe penalties beyond application denial, including potential criminal charges. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of all applicable laws and regulations for the specific jurisdiction. This includes identifying the governing statutes, administrative rules, and any relevant agency guidance. Applicants should then meticulously gather all required documentation, ensuring it meets the precise specifications outlined by the governing authority. Finally, a thorough review of the completed application package before submission is essential to catch any errors or omissions, thereby ensuring compliance and a smooth processing experience. Question 18. The assessment process reveals a non-resident applicant for a Wyoming concealed firearm permit has submitted a certificate for a firearm safety course completed in their home state. What is the most appropriate action to take to ensure compliance with Wyoming's statutory requirements for permit issuance? Option A. Issue the permit based on the applicant's sworn statement that they have received adequate firearm safety training, without requiring specific documentation of the course content or instructor certification. Option B. Verify that the firearm safety training course was conducted by a certified instructor and that its curriculum covers the safe handling of firearms, Wyoming firearm laws, and the use of deadly force, as stipulated by Wyoming statutes annotated. Option C. Accept the certificate as valid, assuming that any firearm safety training recognized in the applicant's home state will satisfy Wyoming's requirements. Option D. Request a detailed curriculum outline from the applicant and independently research the training provider's accreditation in their home state to determine if it aligns with Wyoming standards. The correct answer is B. Verify that the firearm safety training course was conducted by a certified instructor and that its curriculum covers the safe handling of firearms, Wyoming firearm laws, and the use of deadly force, as stipulated by Wyoming statutes annotated. Explanation. The assessment process reveals that navigating the nuances of Wyoming's non-resident concealed firearm permit application, particularly concerning out-of-state training requirements, presents a professionally challenging scenario. Applicants must demonstrate a thorough understanding of Wyoming's specific legal framework, which prioritizes recognized firearms safety training. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these requirements can lead to application denial and potential legal complications. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation meets the precise standards set forth by Wyoming law. The correct approach involves meticulously verifying that the firearm safety training completed by the applicant meets the specific criteria outlined in Wyoming statutes annotated W.S. 6-8-104. This statute mandates that training must be conducted by a certified instructor and cover specific topics such as the safe handling of firearms, firearm laws of Wyoming, and the use of deadly force. Therefore, confirming the training provider's certification and the curriculum's alignment with Wyoming's statutory requirements is paramount. This ensures compliance with the legal mandate for adequate firearms safety education for non-residents seeking a permit. An incorrect approach involves accepting any firearms safety course certificate without scrutinizing its content or the instructor's credentials against Wyoming statutory requirements. This fails to uphold the legal standard for training and could result in a permit being issued to an individual who has not received the legally mandated education, posing a risk to public safety and violating the spirit of the law. Another incorrect approach is to assume that training recognized in the applicant's home state automatically satisfies Wyoming's requirements. While reciprocity agreements may exist for permit recognition, the initial training standards for permit issuance are distinct and must be met according to Wyoming law, regardless of out-of-state certification. This overlooks the specific statutory obligations for initial permit qualification. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the applicant's self-attestation of competency without documentary proof of approved training. Wyoming law requires verifiable evidence of completed training, not just a declaration of skill. This bypasses the established procedural safeguards designed to ensure applicant preparedness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant Wyoming statutes and administrative rules governing concealed firearm permits for non-residents. This involves actively seeking out and consulting the most current legal requirements, cross-referencing applicant documentation against these specific mandates, and prioritizing verifiable evidence of compliance. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel specializing in firearms law is a prudent step to ensure adherence to all legal obligations. Question 19. Cost-benefit analysis shows that optimizing the process for obtaining a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit requires careful consideration of applicant intent and adherence to specific state statutes. If an applicant for a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit provides documentation that appears to meet the basic requirements, but omits proof of completion of a firearm safety course that is recognized by Wyoming law, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Assume the applicant has met the training requirement and proceed with the permit issuance, as they have otherwise met the application criteria. Option B. Deny the permit application immediately due to the incomplete documentation regarding firearm safety training. Option C. Request the applicant to provide proof of completion of a firearm safety course recognized by Wyoming law, as stipulated in Wyoming Statutes Chapter 23, Article 2. Option D. Issue the permit with a note advising the applicant to obtain the required training within a specified time frame. The correct answer is C. Request the applicant to provide proof of completion of a firearm safety course recognized by Wyoming law, as stipulated in Wyoming Statutes Chapter 23, Article 2. Explanation. Cost-benefit analysis shows that optimizing the process for obtaining a Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit requires careful consideration of applicant intent and adherence to specific state statutes. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the applicant's desire for a permit with the state's legitimate interest in ensuring public safety and compliance with its laws. Misinterpreting an applicant's intentions or overlooking procedural requirements can lead to significant legal and ethical ramifications, including the denial of a permit based on false pretenses or, worse, the issuance of a permit to an unqualified individual. The best approach involves a thorough and objective review of the applicant's submitted documentation, focusing on verifying the information provided against the requirements outlined in Wyoming Statutes Chapter 23, Article 2, Concealed Deadly Weapons. This includes confirming residency status in the applicant's home state, ensuring the applicant meets the age and mental competency requirements, and verifying that the applicant has completed a recognized firearm safety course as stipulated by Wyoming law. The justification for this approach lies in its direct adherence to the statutory framework governing concealed firearm permits in Wyoming. It prioritizes factual verification and compliance with established legal criteria, thereby upholding the integrity of the permitting process and the state's public safety objectives. An incorrect approach would be to assume an applicant's intent based on their stated reason for seeking the permit without independently verifying the underlying qualifications. For instance, if an applicant states they need the permit for self-defense while traveling through Wyoming, but their application lacks proof of a valid permit in their home state or fails to meet Wyoming's training requirements, proceeding without further inquiry or denial based on non-compliance would be a regulatory failure. This bypasses the statutory mandate to ensure all permit holders meet specific criteria, potentially compromising public safety. Another incorrect approach is to expedite the process for applicants who appear to be frequent travelers or who express a strong desire for the permit, even if minor discrepancies exist in their application. This deviates from the principle of equal application of the law and can lead to overlooking critical disqualifying factors. Wyoming law does not provide for expedited processing based on perceived need or frequency of travel. All applicants must meet the same rigorous standards. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's self-attestation regarding their eligibility without cross-referencing with available databases or requiring supporting documentation where mandated by statute. Wyoming statutes require specific documentation and verification steps, and failing to perform these due diligence actions constitutes a failure to follow the prescribed regulatory framework. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing statutes and regulations. This involves systematically reviewing each application against these legal requirements, seeking clarification or additional documentation when necessary, and making decisions based on objective evidence and established legal standards. The process should be transparent, consistent, and focused on fulfilling the state's mandate to issue permits only to qualified individuals. Question 20. Operational review demonstrates a need to streamline the fee calculation process for Wyoming non-resident concealed firearm permit applications. A recent applicant from Montana is applying, and the current processing clerk has presented 3 different total fee calculations. Based on Wyoming Statute 6-8-104, which states the application fee is $100 and the fingerprint processing fee is $30, what is the correct total fee for this non-resident applicant? Option A, $130, Option B, $115, Option C, $120, Option D, $100. The correct answer is A, $130. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the required fees for a non-resident concealed firearm permit application in Wyoming. Miscalculation can lead to application rejection, delays, and potential financial repercussions for the applicant, impacting the efficiency and reputation of the issuing authority. Adherence to specific fee structures outlined in Wyoming statutes is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous review of Wyoming Statute 6-8-104, which details the non-resident concealed firearm permit application fees. This statute specifies a base application fee and a potential fingerprint processing fee. The correct approach is to sum these 2 distinct, statutorily defined amounts to arrive at the total required payment. This ensures full compliance with the law and provides the applicant with the precise amount due. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely considering the base application fee without accounting for the additional fingerprint processing fee. This fails to meet the full statutory requirement and would result in an incomplete application. Another incorrect approach is to estimate the total fee based on a general understanding of permit costs without consulting the specific Wyoming statute. This introduces a high risk of error and disregards the precise legal mandate. A further incorrect approach is to apply a flat fee that does not differentiate between the application and fingerprint processing components as required by Wyoming Statute 6-8-104. This demonstrates a lack of attention to the specific fee structure mandated by law. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a systematic approach to fee calculation. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant statute, Wyoming Statute 6-8-104. 2. Breaking down the statute into its component fee requirements, application fee, fingerprint fee. 3. Performing the exact mathematical calculation by summing these components. 4. Verifying the calculation against the statutory requirements before communicating the total to the applicant.